Hi guys, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Design and a Half. In today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the main differences between several design profiles and jobs, if you will. UX designers, UI designers, UX researcher, and digital product designer, or product designer as some would call them. However, before we start, I would like to point out that lately I've been noticing that a lot of people have started to use design as a vehicle to promote themselves rather than to promote design and to promote the concept of being a designer and what it actually means to be a designer, rather than being petty about it and trying to promote less than stellar behavior around the community. I think it doesn't honor designers as people, and it definitely drags down the whole design community as a whole. I really frown down upon this, and I think we should be definitely more inclusive with others that are either joining into this community or have issues to find new jobs, are going to transition periods during this whole COVID crisis, and I think being a little more lenient with them and trying to understand their perspective would also give us would give us more believability as a whole, and would make us be more cohesive instead of being driven apart by sort of petty conflicts of interest, like trying to make someone else look bad just to make yourself look good in a way. I think it doesn't honor design, and I think it doesn't honor us mainly as people. Let's look at this from another perspective and be a little bit the devil's advocate here. A lot of people lost their jobs during this crisis. Now, it's debatable whether they did a great job at being designers or not, and that's actually not up for us to decide whether they did so or they didn't. I think that's for them to know. We can judge them as much as we want in a sort of like our own headspaces, if you will, because that's our own sort of prison where we can talk to ourselves and say whatever we want to. However, I feel like it's not okay to out these things and be sort of get personal with others just to make yourself look better, because it doesn't make you look better. It just makes you look more like a fucking douchebag, if you will. And I think we should definitely stop doing that, especially attacking people on all sorts of levels, and saying stuff like, this or that is bad in terms of like a job, or this or that brings value to design, because I think value depends a lot on whoever is looking at whatever you're selling. So say I'm a person that does design sprints, that does design workshops. I think if someone is willing to buy whatever I'm selling in terms of a product, I don't think it's fair for you or anyone else to judge me based on whatever I'm providing, if whatever I'm providing gives value to someone else and someone else is willing to pay for whatever I'm selling. I think in terms of judgment, it's a false way to look at things, just because as long as someone is willing to pay for a service provided, I think there's no harm being done in that. There's no people who are being fake. There's no people who are trying to dupe anyone in terms of that. I mean, obviously there are, but I'm just saying that if you're doing design sprints, that doesn't mean that you're not bringing value to someone else, if someone else finds what you do valuable. That's the whole concept of value in the end. It's about transactioning services for a reimbursement of cash, if you want to. And I think from that perspective, we all have a little bit of place in this whole marketplace, and I don't think that during this whole crisis we should be trying to pull each other down and cancel each other out, but rather to help each other to get out of this crisis. That's the main takeaway from this whole situation. But okay, let's get back to the subject at hand, because this went a little bit on a second path of its own, and I didn't necessarily want to go there, but I felt like today was a difficult day in that respect, and I just wanted to point out some of those things that were sort of itching me at the back of my head. Talking about UX designers, their main focus and their main value that they bring to a company is the fact that they are able to use their knowledge in information architecture, in their ability to do sitemaps, user flows, low fidelity wireframes, sometimes even high fidelity wireframes, or prototyping for any company that employs them. And the reason why there is such a split between a generalist designer and a specialist designer is because the problem with a generalist designer, even as myself, is that I am able to do a lot of those things very well, but I'm not a specialist in say information architecture or microcopy. And I think UX designers as folk do microcopy and information architecture and can do them much better than I can, just because my focus does not basically exist. My focus is sort of the whole playing field, because I'm a product designer, and as product designers we tend to be a little more expansive, a little bit more encompassing, and try to be in a lot of playing fields at the same time, which is difficult. So we need to work with people who can narrow down on the scope and see a specific area where we, for example, cannot focus for a specific moment, which is why the perfect teams that are working are made out of both specialists and generalists, not generalists alone. Because generalists have this problem of being really good at or being good at everything, but not being stellar at just one thing. And companies do need specialists in some way as much as they need generalists. So I think both of these types need to coexist in a perfect world, and they are both needed. I don't believe that generalists are solely good at being part of startup teams. I think they are good at being in product teams as well, and I think they are good at being in larger companies. They just need to find the sort of dynamic that fits them the best. Because, for example, a UX designer can be super comfortable working with just doing the information architecture, just doing user flows, whereas a product designer might not necessarily be so comfortable doing user flows, but being decent at them. However, this actually depends on the company that is employing these folks. For example, if a company is large enough, they can afford having very specific roles, just because those companies usually invest a lot of money into making their products a little bit better. And the thing with making things better is that the more you invest into something, the more it's the rule of diminishing returns. So the more you if you improve something with 20%, that's going to constitute 80% of your effort, and so on and so forth. So the more you want to improve, the more you have to add in terms of spending. So that means if for example your product is really good right now, if you want to make it stellar, you have to invest a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of research, first of all, because research gives you a higher degree of certainty with regards to whatever it is that you're doing. If it's wrong, if it's right, if you're trying to disprove or prove a theory, if you're trying to see whether something is working or not, that all costs money, especially time. And if you think about time, you also think about money, because it's quantifiable in time is quantifiable in money, obviously. which is why, for example, a super specialized product or a product that is as great as, say, for example, a Mercedes C-Class, it goes through a lot of iterations, it goes through a lot of processes of refinement, because UX in a way is a process of refining a product into its sort of final shape. And the more you invest into UX, the more you refine this product, and the more this quality quota increases, if you will. For example, a product designer can do all of those things pretty well. However, for example, one of them cannot do all of this perfectly, which means that whenever you hire, for example, 3 or 4 or 5 product designers, they still end up being or actually playing the role of UX designers, each of them carving out a specific area that they will be owning out of the whole process, and being the shepherds of those bits of the process, just because they sort of act as a pivot point. Whereas the UX or the UI designer or the UX researcher, they don't pivot. They are just like static, and their career development path is sort of linear, and it's going rather towards being instead of being a generalist or transitioning into management, most of them transition in terms of career paths into architects, for example, UX architects, or lead researchers or lead architects, or anything that goes towards the technical specialization, as opposed to, for example, a generalist, which mostly ends up going towards the management path. Not always, obviously. There are some who decide on specializing on a particular area and then just going towards the technical specialist path. But most of them, at least from my knowledge and from my acquaintances, most of them just went towards the management and the leading path, because at some point they just end up wanting to propagate knowledge towards others who are seeking, for example, to become either specialists or generalists themselves, and they sort of act as these types of guides, having been through several of these paths themselves and having tested them and seen whatever they are. This is the main reasoning why a lot of these folk which are going towards product design also go towards being good mentors and good trainers or leads for other junior designers, because they've already went down each specific career path, or at some point explored that specific career path and accumulated a lot of knowledge that they just want to give back, so that whenever you transition from execution to a management position, you don't sort of lose that touch with reality that being in production or being a sort of specialist, technical specialist gives you. That's why there's this sort of handoff being made from a product or from a leading product towards the juniors and the mids. Okay, going further, I'd like to compare, for example, the UI designer and the UX researcher, or talk a little bit about those two specific designer types, just because I feel like I've been talking a little bit too much about the UX designer and the digital product designer. I want to bring a little bit of light and scope towards the other two types. So the UI designer is the type of person that is more on the visual side, and sometimes for some companies they even go as far as doing some front end code. Not all of the times. Oftentimes they just take care of handing off icons, imagery, sources for specific graphics or small illustrations. They create and maintain the design libraries and the design sort of the design language for applications or websites and so on. They create style guides. They prepare the design for prototyping, and even in some specific cases they do micro interactions and do some prototyping as well. For example, if we're talking about a senior UI designer, that person usually ends up building very intricate prototypes that are interactable in all sorts of cool ways. They usually polish the design, and that being said, they're sort of this visual person that, in contrast with the UX and the UX designer and the UX researcher, is more or less the person that puts the sort of the finishing touches on the wireframing that the UX designer or the UX researcher provides, depending on the scope. Because to be honest, I think both or all of these four roles really depend on the company that you're talking about. There's no clear delimitation between them, only in terms of what we as a design community are seeing them from that perspective. Because in a lot of situations, for example, even in my case, I've been doing research, I've been doing UI designers work, I've been doing UX designers work, I've been doing UX researchers work, and I've been even doing project management work. So from that perspective, what I can tell you is that each company has its own particular needs that people need to end up adapting to in the end. It's not necessarily a clear-cut definition of this is this and this is that. It's not that simple as to just put them in containers and isolate them and labeling them, because design is very difficult to label in the first place, and labeling designers that have very specific roles is even more difficult, just because these specific roles depend on each specific company that we're talking about and that those companies' needs. That's the whole thing, and I think this is one of the main takeaways that people often forget about, because we tend to like to put things into boxes as people. That's our main drive, to label them, to categorize them, so that we know how to reference them back. Which is why we also oftentimes label people. We label things, we label behaviors and so on, and that's why we need to have a sort of comfort to be able to reference back and say, oh, this is this type of person, this is that type of person, oh, I recognize this pattern from there and there and there. It's the same thing with jobs as well, if you will. We need to have that familiarity, we need to have that sense of recognizing whatever it is that someone else is doing, and being in a way having a reassurance about being very specific about those things. That's what that's what the main thing about labeling is for us as people. Okay, getting back to the point at hand. UX researchers are people who are mainly focusing on the more theoretical aspect of the design, of the design theme, if you will, because they're usually people who do a lot of heuristic evaluations, they do competitive analysis, they do third-party research, they do user interviews and surveys, they do a lot of studies, and they try to document days in the lives of the users and do diaries of users. Their actual product from this research is insight, and insight probably is the most difficult thing to quantify, which is a reason why a lot of people actually misunderstand UX researchers for being UX designers and UX designers for UX researchers. This is the weird thing. Because UX researchers sometimes can sway over into the UX designer's role and do some prototyping, some very light information architecture. It actually depends on each person's interest and specialization, if you will, and sort of life experience, what other jobs they've been going through. UX researchers also do personas, and for the most part, they are the people that handle the whole user testing bit in most companies that we're talking about. So they are the shepherds of the users in a lot of ways. They are the people that take care of the research aspect, and whatever they produce gets shared between UX designer, UI designer, and digital product designer. So in an ideal sort of world, you would have the all of these four characters at the same table, if you will, when the UX researcher's job is sort of finished doing his or her initial analysis or evaluation or survey or study and creating some insight. This insight is shared between the UX designer and the UI designer and the product designer, obviously, and sort of like together they decide on the best course of action going forward with regards to a specific feature, a specific product, for, if you will, and that's how design is sort of born in phases. For example, the ideation phase, the research phase, not the research phase, the discovery phase, which is sort of the research phase that transitions into discovery, that transitions back into testing or prototyping, and then it ends up into basically production, if you will. That's the gist of most companies that operate with these types of characters for the better part. Now, getting back to the digital or product designer, this is a special type of case because there's always been this discussion about product designers being sort of or trying to appropriate a role which is not necessarily true for them, in the sense that actual product designers are whatever we now call the physical product designers, or this is what they used to be. And there's a good reason why a lot of people nowadays started to sort of distance themselves from the concept of product designer and rather talk about digital product designer, because it also adds value with another concept that is sort of foreign to the other three types of designers, and that is sort of the business insight. Because as opposed to the other three, the digital product designer is one of those people who are actually more in depth on the subject of business, and not necessarily only business but also business strategy. Because if we're thinking about a product designer or digital product designer, his main role is to go and be knowledgeable about whatever technology is out there, whatever capabilities are out there, whatever the competition is doing, and whatever the company has in sights for itself in terms of a long-standing strategy, but also sort of this short-term strategy. And think whenever proposals get made about specific features being implemented or products being developed, being that sort of voice of reason that can both act as a glue between the layers of engineering, design, and business, as well as sort of act as a withstanding product owner if a product owner is not, for example, present in that specific company. Same goes for a product manager. For example, most companies don't necessarily have product managers, just because the portfolio of products they have is not necessarily as big as corporations, for example. Corporations usually have product managers because they need to keep an overview over several product lines that are developing simultaneously, and each of those product managers have product owners themselves that take care of a specific product, and sort of shepherd it, which is where these digital product designers that have digital talents that go towards business or go towards the visual side can find room to exist in a way. And that's why a lot of companies nowadays are looking for digital product designers, just because they realized these types of characters and these types of traits that people with the badge of digital product designer present are very useful, like I said earlier, from a business perspective, because design by tradition didn't necessarily exist in the space of business and was usually cut out from it, and was existing in this silo where only design talk was existing and only design related topics were discussed and so on. And nowadays there's this need for designers to be more present at the table whenever business is being discussed, just because design's influence in business is much higher than people actually expect it to be or actually want it to be, and they don't even realize this until to the very last point where stuff gets implemented, where stuff gets being shown to other people, and that's when some mistakes just like seep in. And that's the perfect moment for product designers to come and say, guys, let's look at the overall strategy and think about what we're doing here. Does it make sense? Someone needs to actually challenge these things to be able to always fall back and say, are we still building the right thing for the right people for the right reason? And this is one of the main reasons, for example, why product designers or digital product designers are really important in today's design ecosystem, because they always, or at least from my point of view, I think they should be always thinking about both the ethical part of design too. Because design has an ethical aspect to it, and oftentimes it gets sort of lost in the translation, and people, especially companies, tend to forget that design or whatever products they are producing, are meant for people, not necessarily to be duping them, but to be convincing them that whatever you're producing is actually good and provides value. And lately, this whole conversation about value has sort of shifted from providing value to providing perceived value at the lowest amount of effort for the company, and at the highest expected price for the consumer, which is really crappy as a ethic, as a work ethic, as a product ethic. And I think this is where product designers can have a real say in it and just step up to the plate and be there to guide companies into saying whatever they are doing is not okay, and they should be really challenging these companies to do the right thing for the users and for the people and for their consumers, just because otherwise those companies are simply going to die out, because people are not as stupid as companies want them to think they are. And lately, especially since this whole COVID crisis is going on, people are looking more and more about the way they handle their money, they handle their financial aspects, and they're looking at trying to cut down on expenses, which means that they are less likely to consume products and be sort of more frugal with their acquisitions. What this means in turn for the companies, that they're probably going to be investing a lot more money and being way more aggressive with people into showing them ads and trying to convince them really violently to buy whatever they don't need, or to give them as little value as possible for as little effort as possible for the most amount of money. I think this sort of takeaway here is that we as a design community can have a say in this. We definitely have, each of us has a place into this into companies, and we shouldn't like try to beat each other up with sticks and try to start sort of fights over whoever is better, because I think we are all needed into the ecosystem of today's world, and each of our talents is useful for the companies that we are working for or are going to be working for. And we should be glad that there's specialists as much as there's generalists, and we should actually learn to coexist with each other, because we need each other as much as the companies need us. That's the takeaway from my perspective out of the whole subject. Okay, thanks for sticking up for so long with today's podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I provided some value with it. I'm sorry if I was sounding a little bit ranty. I'm trying to provide a lot of value to every person that is listening to this podcast, even if it's just one person or if it's two persons. I hope you had something interesting gotten out of the whole discussion that I've provided for you. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, to my YouTube channel, or to this podcast. Leave a comment if you want to, even a small encouragement, whatever you feel is appropriate. I'd be really happy to engage with some of you. It's sometimes it gets lonely when you're doing these episodes, because you have the feeling that you're talking to walls, and there's no conversation coming back. But I really like putting out these episodes, and I hope they will provide value for even if it's for one person. I'll be super glad about it. So yeah, that being said, I wish you a pleasant evening or morning, wherever it is that you are consuming this episode in. And I'll see you in the next episode. Have a great week, and talk to you next time. Bye bye.